Thanks to everybody for coming, and thank you to the Media Lab for having us. I have a little bit of a cold, so sorry if I just stop and drink some water or cough. It's actually the first time I've been sick since Aaron died, which I think is a little bit miraculous. Like most of you here, I have a strong affinity for MIT. I lived here for 2 summers as both a student and then later a counselor at the Research Science Institute. My first kiss was on MIT campus, although not with Aaron. When I first started dating Aaron on what was probably our 3rd or 4th date, I came up here from DC for July 4th weekend. We walked down Massachusetts Avenue to the river to watch the fireworks. I had to go to the bathroom, and for some reason he waited for me out on the sidewalk as I ran into the cafeteria building instead of coming in with me. I didn't think much of it at the time. There were a couple other odd things that I noticed, like he insisted that I not leave the door to his apartment unlocked when I ran down the hall to the washing machines. But I didn't understand how those things fit together until later. One day in July, he called me. I was at Frisbee practice in DC. And he said, there's this thing that might hit the news tomorrow about me. Do you want to hear it from me, or do you want to read it in the news? And I said, well, I guess I want to hear it from you. And he said, I'm going to be indicted for downloading too many academic journal articles. And they want to make an example out of me. And I said, that doesn't sound like a very big deal. He paused for a second and he thought about it and he said, yeah, I guess it's not like anybody has cancer. And then it kind of was like that. I called him back later that evening. And I said, sorry, I feel like I might have underreacted. I'm sure this is really stressful, being arrested, and so on. And he said, no, that was actually the most helpful reaction that anybody's had. Please stick with it. The case took its toll over the last 2 years of his life. And I don't think any of us actually realized how much of a toll it had taken until later, until after he died. He hid it from us well. Yesterday was 2 months since he died. It's been a hard week already, and it's only Tuesday. Yesterday I spent a little bit of time going through some of Aaron's stuff, which is now in storage here in Cambridge. And I came across a couple of to-do lists. He always wrote them on the back of envelopes. One of them was probably from October or November or thereabouts. And in between items like, make a dentist appointment and talk to Brian on my team, there was an item that said Taren test. And I didn't know what it was. And what was especially interesting about this item was that it was crossed off. So I'm not sure what that was about. But it did remind me of one of Aaron's ideals. And as the Media Lab said, we're here to honor Aaron's ideals. And one of his ideals was iterative learning and testing, and always learning from mistakes. He always wanted to test everything, including and especially his own assumptions. So he was a scientist in the true sense of that word. One of Aaron's blog posts from last year was called Cherish Mistakes. Let me read a little bit from it. This is a tale of 2 nonprofits. At one, they hate making mistakes. How else could it be? We're not ever going to enjoy screwing up, they told me. But this attitude has a lot of consequences. Everything they do has to go through several layers of approval to make sure it's not a mistake. And when someone does screw up, they try to hide it. It's only natural. You know you're going to get in trouble for screwing up, so you try to fix it before anyone notices. If you can't, then your boss or your boss's boss tries. And if no one in the organization can fix it, and it goes all the way to the executive director, then he tries to figure out a way to keep it from the press or spin it appropriately, so the world never finds out they made a mistake. The other nonprofit, they have a very different attitude. You notice it the first time you visit their website. Right in their navigation bar at the top of every page, the link labeled Mistakes. Click it, and you'll find a list of all the things they screwed up, starting with the most horribly embarrassing one. They once promoted their group under false names on the internet. And it goes on to discuss mistakes, big and small, core and peripheral. They previously used flaky phones that would cut out during a call, annoying people. They were insufficiently skeptical in some of the most important claims they made. At times, their admissions have the tone of a chastised teenager forced to write an apology. But together, they provide a remarkable record of all the mistakes, both crucial and mundane, you might reasonably make when starting something new. It's not that this group likes making mistakes. You can feel the annoyance and the embarrassment seeping through the page, but they don't shirk from them either. They identify their mistake, admit them publicly, and devise steps to avoid them the next time. They use it as an opportunity to get better. Mistakes are our friend. They can be exasperating friends sometimes, the kind whose antics embarrass and annoy, but their heart is in the right place. They want to help. It's a bad idea to ignore our friends. It's a hard attitude to take toward mistakes. They're so embarrassing. Our natural instinct is to want to hide them and cover them up, but that's the wrong way to think about them. They're actually giving us a gift, because they're pointing the way toward getting better. One of the really interesting things about this mandate from Aaron to cherish our mistakes is how closely it aligns with MIT's mandate. What do I mean by that? I mean that MIT is about science and about furthering human knowledge. And there's a funny thing about science, which is that you're supposed to admit when you're wrong. I heard a story once about an academic who'd been working on a project for decades on a theory, trying to prove it, and got up at the front of a conference on a panel with another academic, and the second academic laid out a clear case, new evidence for why the first person was wrong. And the first person took the microphone and said, "I was wrong." And the audience cheered. That's what science is. That's what academics are supposed to do. The mission statement of MIT reads, "The mission of MIT is to advance knowledge in science, technology, and other areas of scholarship that will best serve the nation and the world in the 21st century. The Institute is committed to generating, disseminating, and preserving knowledge, and to working with others to bring this knowledge to bear on the world's greatest challenges. We seek to develop in each member of the MIT community the ability and passion to work wisely, creatively, and effectively for the betterment of humankind." So MIT's core worldview is the worldview of science, and your mission is the dissemination of knowledge and the betterment of humankind. That statement describes Aaron to a T. And this alignment of missions is why MIT's involvement in Aaron's prosecution and death are so tragic and so ironic. You're probably all familiar with the broad outlines of the prosecution against Aaron, but you may not be as familiar with MIT's involvement. There were many decision points MIT faced. MIT called in the Secret Service for a matter that could have been handled internally. When JSTOR reached a settlement with Aaron and publicly called on the prosecution to drop the case, MIT refused to join. For years, MIT cooperated with the prosecution, freely providing them with evidence, documents, and access to staff interviews, while Aaron's lawyers had to fight for over a year to get interviews with the exact same staff. At any point in the 2 years preceding Aaron's death, MIT could have issued a public statement saying that it did not want the prosecution to proceed, and the case would have gone away. After repeated private entreaties that MIT make that statement, Aaron and I had given up hope that the General Counsel's office would listen to reason of its own volition. And so over the last 6 weeks of his life, we were beginning to work with friends and supporters, alumni, students of MIT who wanted to help. We were, for the first time, willing to make the case public. For most of our relationship, Aaron had actually been actively avoiding any public discussion of the case. He'd been avoiding press. But these supporters were going to launch a website called Save Aaron. They were going to poster the campus with a slogan that I'm personally very proud of devising: "Nerd does not equal criminal." Aaron's missions and MIT's were aligned. We both believe in dissemination of knowledge. We both believe in bettering the world. So where did MIT go wrong? Why were the General Counsel of MIT, Greg Morgan, and his staff so bent on helping Steve Hyman and Carmen Ortiz make an example out of Aaron and lock him up? I think the answer lies in one of Aaron's favorite books, Moral Mazes, by sociologist Robert Jackal. Jackal explores how managers and other actors in bureaucracies make decisions about moral questions, which at a fundamental root, most questions and decisions are moral. Let me tell you about the book in Aaron's own words. From another blog post, this one from 2006. Moral Mazes, one of my very favorite books, tells the story of a company chosen essentially at random and through careful investigation from top to bottom, explains precisely how it operates, with the end result of explaining how so many well-intentioned people can end up committing so much evil. This week's scene takes place inside a textile processing plant at Weft Corporation, where the company's poor, low-paid workers are suffering from bisonosis. Bisonosis, also called brown lung disease, is when your lungs fill up with cotton dust. Eventually your throat closes up and you suffocate to death. The company insists that the whole thing is a stunt made up by Ralph Nader and other liberal do-gooders. But one day they changed their tune. This is now quoting from Jekyll. Weft, as well as all the other large and medium-sized American textile companies, was actually addressing the cotton dust problem, but in a characteristically indirect way. As part of a larger modernization effort, the firm invested $20 million in a few plants where executives knew such an investment would make money. The investment had the side benefit of reducing cotton dust levels. One manager who was in charge of the project comments on whether cotton dust was a principal factor in the decision. Publicly, of course, Weft Corporation, as do many other firms, claims that the money was spent entirely to eliminate dust, evidence of its corporate good citizenship. Privately, executives admit that without the productive return, they would not have, indeed, given the constraints under which they operate, could not have spent the money. And they have not done so in several other plants, and only with great reluctance, if at all, in sections of otherwise renovated plants where it's more difficult to achieve simultaneous cost and dust reduction. Aaron's conclusion from this story was that corporate managers simply aren't allowed to be moral or even reasonable, and those who are simply weeded out. As we're talking about Aaron's core ideals, I should say that I think this book helped Aaron articulate one of those core ideals. That we each have the same moral obligations in our professional roles as we do in our personal lives. That institutions per se do not deserve our loyalty. They deserve it only as long as they facilitate good in the world, and they lose it when they facilitate bad. Most people don't operate that way. Jekyll put it like this: what is right in the corporation is not what's right in a man's home or church. What is right in the corporation is what the guy above wants from you. Managers do not generally discuss ethics, morality, or moral rules in use in a direct way with each other, except perhaps in seminars organized by ethicists. And elsewhere, bureaucracy erodes internal and even external standards of morality, not only in matters of individual success and failure, but in all the issues that managers face in their daily work. Another of Jekyll's core points is that managers aren't allowed to admit mistakes in bureaucracies. Most bureaucracies operate like the first of the nonprofits that Aaron wrote about in his blog post earlier. But scientists are supposed to operate like the second of the two nonprofits. And so, my question for MIT is, which are you first and foremost? Are you scientists or are you bureaucracy? I respect MIT's mission and the people here a great deal. There's no doubt, however, that MIT made mistakes. There's no doubt that the persecution that led to Aaron's death has made the world a much, much worse place in violation of MIT's mission. Immediately after Aaron's death, MIT's President Reif announced an investigation into MIT's involvement in the case, headed by esteemed Professor Hal Abelson. I was hopeful. I was hopeful that this investigation might be in the spirit of genuine science, of acknowledging and learning from mistakes. We can never get Aaron back, but MIT can ensure that this kind of injustice and tragedy doesn't happen again. But since then, I've become less hopeful. I fear that the investigation will instead be in the spirit of a bureaucracy. I fear it will be the kind of investigation that Robert Jekyll might have written about, a PR exercise, a whitewash. I fear this because the fact that the General Counsel's office is itself involved in running the investigation, of which it should be the primary subject. I fear this because it's been 2 months, and my understanding is that neither Aaron's lawyers nor Aaron's father have been interviewed by the committee that's running the investigation, and there hasn't been any sign that the report will be released until media interest has blown over. Another of Aaron's ideals was asking challenging questions, and that's why I'm here to ask those questions today. So here's my challenging question for those of you at this institution who care about its ideals and care about your own moral compasses. Is MIT a scientific enterprise working to fulfill its mission of bettering the world? Or is MIT a bureaucracy, operating more like for-profit corporations, interested primarily in promoting itself as an organization? Here's how you'll be able to tell. If MIT releases its report in a timely fashion, it's already been 2 months. How much longer do we have to wait? If the report represents MIT's critics in this matter fully and fairly, if the report acknowledges serious mistakes by MIT, if the report holds specific people and organizational structures accountable for those mistakes, if the report refers to the morality of the actions of people at MIT in the context of universal ethics, not in the context of organizational security, if the organization of MIT implements clear, actionable changes that a reasonable person would believe would have prevented Aaron's persecution and death had they been implemented before his case. And perhaps most of all, I'm going to need to give a little background for this one, Aaron's lawyers are filing a motion this week to lift the protective order on the evidence against Aaron. So far, the press and people close to Aaron, including me, have not been able to see the evidence against him because it's under a protective order. Most of it would have been introduced publicly at trial had there been a trial, which is what all parties were expecting. But at the moment, the evidence is not available publicly. And it's critical for us to understand what happened and the extent of the malfeasance by the prosecutor's office, for us to be able to see that evidence and for journalists to be able to see that evidence. If MIT opposes public access to this evidence, if MIT opposes the lifting of the protective order, then we can be quite certain that MIT's investigation is not proceeding in good faith. I had a nightmare about a week after Aaron died. I dreamt that I was in a house, that the two of us were in a house, and we were living there, and we knew that there was somebody after us. Somebody was coming after us, and it felt in the dream as if we could just secure the house, if we could just lock the doors, put furniture in front of them, board up the windows with 2x4s, that we would be safe. And so we were, running around the house with nails and hammers, trying to secure the house. And I stopped for a moment when it seemed like we had made a lot of progress to make breakfast. And I made Aaron's favorite breakfast. I made him eggs and Swiss cheese, scrambled eggs and Swiss cheese. And when I turned around in my dream, Aaron was dead for no reason. In the dream, I didn't know who was coming after us. I didn't know who the enemies were. But in real life, it was Steve Hyman and Carmen Ortiz with the help of the MIT General Counsel's Office. We all make mistakes. Nothing can bring Aaron back. But MIT has the chance to make a major course correction here. Aaron would have respected an organization that could do so. The question is, will it? Thank you.